macroscopic level, they exist to kill. They travel, they attack, they hide, they even gather together in defense maneuvers. Pathogens are the enemies of every member of the healthcare team. On Pathogens and PPE, we give you the tools you need to fight these threats and win. So sit back, tune in, and let's make these microbes tremble at the sound of your name.
Hello and welcome back to episode number 10 of the Pathogens and PPE podcast, season 2. My name is Jill Holdsworth and I am your host. I'm an infection preventionist in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm here with my co-host, Trevor. Trevor, why don't you give everybody a little bit of background about yourself? I know you were on the podcast a couple episodes ago, but maybe somebody for shame haven't listened to that podcast yet. And if you haven't, you need to go back and listen to it, but reintroduce yourself for everybody.
Yeah. Hi, Jill. Thanks so much for having me again. I'm glad to get the invite back to chat with you today about brushes. I am a brush enthusiast, a sterile processing advocate, and I work with H&M Medical as their clinical resource director.
I really hope that's on your resume, brush enthusiast, because that's awesome. I might add that to mine as well. All right, we have 3 amazing guests today, and I'm just going to go around and ask them to do the same, give a little history about how they got here, what they do, where they work, all the things. I'm going to start with my buddy, Nelson.
My name is Nelson Winter. I'm a supervisor at Wellspan Health, and I love brushes every bit as much as you do.
Make sure that goes on your resume also. All right, going to Emily.
I'm Emily Barnard. I'm an infection prevention manager at Mountains Community Hospital. I have done extensive endoscope reprocessing, process improvement initiatives, and brushes tend to be the underlying thing, not only with the endoscopes, but also some of the other ones. So I guess I'm going to have to be with you, Trevor. I'm that brush enthusiast as well.
I love this. And I'm glad that you mentioned the scopes, because when I think of brushes, I immediately think to sterile processing and instrumentation. So I'm glad that you're keeping endoscopes at the top of mind, because we definitely need to do that. And last but not least, Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron Hunsucker. I am a clinical education specialist with HealthMark. They call me the cowboy of clean. Therefore, brushes is my thing. So can't clean without a brush. I'm sorry. It can't be done.
Yeah, this is very true.
Yeah.
All right. This is going to be a great episode. And like we've alluded to, this is going to be all about brushes, size, how to use them, all the different things. So let's just get right to it. Let's talk about how many brushes you have to use. Why are they so important? And why is the appropriate type, size, brush so important when you're starting to clean something new, something old, what have you, in your facility? Ron, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I mean, even the CDC defines cleaning as friction and fluid. And you can't have the friction, the proper friction you need for cleaning, if you don't have the right size brush. For instance, a Fraser suction takes 1, 2, 3, 4 different size brushes. Arthroscopy shavers take 4 different size brushes, because there's so many different lumens in one instrument. I have yet to see one that will actually properly clean a yank hour, though. I just don't get it. Nor Fraser's, because there's nothing to get in that hollow spot that's in either one of them. So if you don't have the right size brush, you're either crushing it or it's too loose and it's not hitting all the sides. So yeah, that's my answer. I lost you, Jill. You're on mute.
That's a great point, Ron. I totally agree with you on the sizes of the brushes. Obviously, we're talking about channel brushes. You know, it can't be too big. If it is, the bristles get pressed together and the tips of the bristles are not going to make contact. If the brush is too small, it's not going to make complete contact with the interior part of the lumen or the channel. So you need to have the size that's just right, and that's one of the most important things. How about you, Emily? What do you think?
One of the things that, just to look a little bit off to the side, looking at the packaging of some of those brushes, especially when you're looking at those working channel brushes, the packaging looks almost identical. You have to look so carefully. And one of the things that I thought was really important is how Amy actually says that these devices should be kept separately. And that way you don't get confused about which device you're using. And especially if you're using the wrong brush. It's a good way to damage those channels and force something through that shouldn't be, as well as not truly cleaning the channels, potentially not having a patient-ready scope.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest things if you're using a brush that's too big, is it can cause damage to the interior walls of that lumen, particularly if it's a curved suction, or if the channel kind of changes directions, it can cause scrapes on the inside of that channel. And that's a great place for biofilm to start to form. So definitely a good point. Nelson, what do you think?
I agree with everything that you guys were pointing out about the size of the diameter of the brushes. But in addition to that, making sure that you have the proper length of the brushes to be able to go all the way through a cannulated channel, and you're not just basically pushing it to one point and stopping and turning the other way and trying to do that. That's why it's important to follow IFUs if it's specific to the brushes, and being able to properly clean that. But also when you're talking about like the brushes that are kind of like the toothbrushes, having different sizes of those brushes can make it so that way you can get more intricate small parts of an instrument. Or for something large like a book walther or something, having a larger brush, you can get more surface area, so it's more ergonomic and you're not sitting there for 3 hours cleaning one item.
Absolutely. The types of brushes that you might be using for a toothbrush style brush, with the different types of bristles they have, whether it's, antimicrobial nylon, it could be polypropylene. There's brass bristle brushes, soft stainless steel brushes. And so depending on what you're cleaning, there's all kinds of types, and you need to make sure you're choosing the right one. One of the things we always would hear about is how difficult it is to clean the kerosene rongeurs, because there's bone lodged in there, and how are you supposed to get that out with a nylon bristle brush? Follow your facility policies at your health system or your hospital, but also make sure you're reaching out to the vendors for support, because I'm sure there's a lot of samples or a lot of education that vendors would be able to provide for these things.
I also have a follow-up question for you, something that really kind of caught me off guard when we were doing a recent study, is that it's almost impossible to tell what size these brushes are once they're out of the packaging. So when you have some of these sets that require 15 to 20 different brushes, how do you keep them separate? Do you keep them in the packages until you need to use them? And it's almost impossible if you unpackage all of them to know which one is which, and then to be compliant with the IFUs.
So keeping the brushes in the packaging, like we have a area off to the side of our decon where we do have like brushes, because you go through so many of them in the course of the day, you're going to need to get more. And having that so that way you can make sure you're grabbing the right one at the right time for the right instrument, that is something that you can definitely do. But also I've seen there's companies like Key Surgical, or there's a couple other brush companies that actually have these placards that have diameter size gauges. It'll have different holes, and it'll actually say what the diameter size is and the type of French size that it would actually be designed for.
Yeah, those types of things can be very helpful, especially for those sets that require so many different brushes. I mean, as an IP, that blew my mind. Like, how can we set these team members up for success? I mean, it would definitely be easier just to make shortcuts, which I know can very easily happen, which we don't want that to happen. But now I can definitely see why it could. All right, Ron, next question for you. Is there a proper technique to brushing, or can you just shove it in there and move it around and hope for the best?
You're funny.
I like to think so too, but thanks for telling me.
I mean, and then actually it all depends on the brushes. Now, folks, I don't know how long y'all been doing this, but we didn't have brushes for sterile processing back when I started. Right? We were using bottle brushes. We were using test tube brushes. And unfortunately, a lot of the companies that came out with the tube brushes are following the same design. They're using the metal handles and the ring on the end. And they're starting to put the plastic tips on the very top. When there's so much more technology out there now to where, I mean, they have the pull through, right? That you can, instead of pushing and actually scratching the instrument, you can pull it all the way through. So the handle goes through first. You don't have a ring on the end, you know. And as you were discussing earlier about finding the proper size, color coding is becoming very common. And you'll see it more and more often. So staff will give me that black one or give me that blue one. Or I'm going to grab the red one, because they learn which one's going to be best for whatever they're doing. And if you're in decontam all the time, trust me, you're going to know which one's going to work best, because whatever gets the job done faster is the best thing you're going to use. I mean, you're always going to use whatever is going to get the job done faster, because you don't want to be in there going through lumens all day long. Oh, it's still dirty, and it's still dirty. It'll drive you crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the other things that comes to mind on technique with brush, you know, Ron, you mentioned the twisted stainless steel handle brushes. There's a variety of different types of channel brushes. Some have like an acrylic rod, some are the pull through, like you mentioned. When you're using a brush that's a twisted stainless steel, technically speaking, you should be twisting the brush as it goes through the channel, and you actually want to twist this in a clockwise direction. The reason you would do it in a clockwise direction rather than counterclockwise is because the way the twisted wire, that's the way that they build the brush essentially. So it's actually kind of tightening the grip on the bristles. If you go opposite that, it can loosen the grip of the bristles. Now, if you're using a brand new brush, you know, each time you start your shift, that might not be a huge concern. However, I've been in many hospitals and many departments where there are brushes that have been in use for way too long and the bristles are barely hanging on. And in particular, if the brush is too big and you're jamming it down in and then you're twisting it, it really can cause the bristles to fall out or end up, you know, in an instrument or in a set, and that's obviously problematic. Emily, what about you?
I think you said something that was really important, talking about the directionality, which also made me think about handedness. So you might have your right-handed people who might naturally go in that clockwise direction, but thinking about some people who are working left-handed, it might be easier to go in the other way, and thinking how sometimes those bristles do get a directionality as they're starting to be used more than once, and how actually, if you go against that, you could potentially cause wire scratches and damage to whatever you're doing. One of the interesting things, too, is people get creative. And I love the idea that you said about colors. They use it in micropipetting. They use it in hospitals in all different ways, even soil versus clean, just creating a color-coded directionality from sizing. I do worry about having an instrument that you're going to put this through. It's one more step that has the potential for breaking down in that process. And sometimes you work with what you have. But one question I would really ask is, at what point, what would be the frequency of disposing of those brushes, especially since you were talking about, and we've all seen it, those wired brushes, those brushes that look like it's a bad hair day. How do you manage those?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think the standards ST79 says that cleaning brushes themselves must be cleaned or washed or disinfected or even sterilized at least once every day. I think that is something that would need to be considered, you know, from your facility. If this is a high volume facility with dozens of technicians and lots of operating rooms, lots of volume. Typically what these types of facilities do, that's the easiest and cleanest option, is to just throw the brushes away at the end of the shift. And when you start your new shift, you just grab a new set of brushes. However, you know, if you're a community hospital or a little bit more rural and budgets are a little bit tighter, it is possible to just wash those brushes daily. I would suggest that you track that, because if that's the standard, you got to be able to show that it's happening. And so, you know, that's also a consideration where some facilities would move to a disposable policy at the end of the day or at the end of the shift. Nelson, what have you seen in terms of like brush policies in the facilities you've worked at? You know, what do you do currently?
So we have a morning shift bin that is used in the morning. It's run through the wash, and then it's inspected on the other side, is disinfected, and then there's an evening shift. And anything that's starting to get kind of iffy or snaggled or discolored, or it's kind of coming off a little bit weird. If it's janky, it's getting thrown out right there. Otherwise, if you're using a brush and it's grossly getting soiled, or it's really starting to get discolored or disfigured, just throw it out. I've seen at other places that I've been, there's been brushes that have been there, and it seems like it's been there for like 5 years. It's a $2 brush. When in doubt, throw it out. Like, I don't understand sometimes, like, the emotional attachment we get to these things. Like, it's not worth it. So when you're talking about patient safety, err on the side of caution. Just get rid of the brush. But yeah, if you are washing your brushes, you're disinfecting them, but you should track that. If that's your policy, you should err on doing it more times than once a day, in my opinion. But everybody has their different policies and different reasons. We're an orthopedic hospital, so our brushes get used pretty hard.
I have this picture I show in a lot of my presentations, and it's a toothbrush style brush, and it looks like somebody literally was just chewing on it. And I say it looks like my son's toothbrush because it literally does. Like, why would that still be in an SPD? That is like classic, should have been thrown away 5 years ago, to your point, Nelson. So for IPs out there that are looking for a way to kind of get into rounding or auditing on easy stuff in SPD, it's very easy to audit the brushes. I also have a picture I show of a brush that is so rusted that I have it beside a new brush and the whole brush is rusted. So what's your first sign that something should be thrown away? Maybe if the whole thing is rusted, it should have been thrown away 5 years ago, or if it looks like your son chewed on it while he was brushing his teeth. So there are very clear signs your brushes are too old if you're using a reusable brush. Even disposable brushes, if you're using them hard, can get that way in a matter of hours. So yes, great points, everybody. These are things that are really no-brainers. If you're questioning, should I keep using this brush? You probably should not be.
Yeah, and if I can just add on to that really quick too, many times I've seen like a brush rack on the wall in decontam, and there's just this weird squiggle zigzag brush that's just barely hanging on, and it's just sitting there. And most people are like, yeah, we don't use that brush. It's just been there since before I started. It's been here for years. Get rid of those things. Those are red flags. If that brush is sitting in there, I'm doing an audit or what have you, I see it, I'm like, it shouldn't be there. Obviously, it should have been thrown away long ago. If I dig into this, even with like one question or a couple more questions, I'm probably going to find more poor practices where you're not meeting the standards. So don't leave those obvious signs laying around your department.
I look for cups of brushes. That's usually where I find them. It's like a random cup, and they put all their brushes in there after they use them. And usually there's some that should have been thrown away a long time ago. So again, IPs listening, if you're not comfortable walking through SPD, these are just kind of easy things that you can start looking for and getting more comfortable as you round.
All right. I think one more thing, as you brought up the cups, something behind closed doors that you might not be thinking of. Look in your drawers. You find all sorts of crazy things in drawers. You find your brushes with pens, with something that is supposed to be reusable and it's disposable. Yeah. Look in the drawers, look under cabinets, open things, because that's where you're going to find your little treasure trove of what is this? How is this used? And you start going down that rabbit hole and just want to take the entire drawer and dump it out.
Yep. Everything gets shoved in the drawers or hidden. One or the other.
Usually hidden.
All right, let's talk about IFUs. I have two huge pet peeves about brushes that end up in IFUs. So I'm going to talk about them one at a time. So the first one, I want to see what you guys think about it, how you possibly be compliant with this language. I just want your thoughts. So when you see in an IFU, use the appropriate sized brush. What do? Ron?
Find out I will determine what the appropriate size brush is, period. I mean, like we were saying earlier, if it's too tight, it's not doing its job. It's crushing it. If it's too loose, it's not hitting all the sides. So it's kind of like, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You have to get that one brush is just right, so, and following the technique, and Trevor mentioned earlier the technique with the stainless steel brushes. Anything that goes to aluminum must be rotated, period. But also when Nelson talked about the brushes for getting into delicate areas, then you want to get a real small brush that, like for doing a debakey or vascular instruments, you need something that's very thin to get in there. Yeah, sometimes you have to make your own determination what the proper size brush is, but that's usually the users. And like I said, once they learn, that's why I like color code.
Yeah.
Well, that black one will work best for this or stuff like that. So, yeah.
My fear is our technicians aren't savvy enough about what we're talking about. They need more training, more education. And of course, we say this about a lot of things. This is one small thing in their day, but Trevor knows, we know how to determine if it's too big, too small, but is each technician going to make sure that they take that time to figure that out? Do they know how to do that? And I think that's where we need to take the future of brushes, making sure everybody does this without even thinking, making sure they have the right size brush so that it's second nature. And I'm not sure that every technician feels that comfortable. I don't know, Nelson, maybe you can speak for yourself or for your team, but I would love to see every technician feel so confident that they could pick the right size brush and that they would do that every time, even when they're in a hurry.
Yeah, oftentimes when people are first starting out, I see they either grab way too small of a brush just because, it's easy to get it through. I can pass it through and it's easy. Or what you'll see is they'll grab a brush that is way too big because they're really trying to scrub down the walls of the lumen. And realistically, you only need something that's slightly larger than the lumen you're trying to pass it through. It doesn't have to be drastically big. You're actually going to lose effective actions of that manual scrubbing, but you just want to be slightly larger than the lumen you're trying to clean.
Absolutely. It does need to be at least the same size, if not probably, like you said, a little bit bigger than the channel. The limit that you would be able to use, it needs to be within 1/8 of an inch of the diameter of the channel you're trying to clean, or it needs to be within that range, bigger than the channel you're trying to clean. And I think obviously you need to have an assortment of brushes to be able to figure that out. I agree with what you said earlier, Nelson, about, there's various resources out there, brush scales, brush sizing tools from some of the vendors. Get those into Decontam. So if I see a new suction I haven't seen before, I can hold that up to my brush scale and figure out, this is a 3mm. So I'm going to grab the 3mm brush, or maybe the 4mm brush to go through that. So that's definitely a key component of the right size.
Emily, where do you think infection prevention can fit in and assist with this kind of topic or process?
I think it really begins with looking at the instructions for use. And this is the concern about creating a general policy, because it's really hard to capture how each of these could differ. Even when you're looking at, let's say you're looking at one brand of endoscopes and you typically see one standard across the board and then one will deviate. And so maybe you're throwing in a different brand or a different size or something that's maybe a little bit more unique. So really it goes back to looking at those instructions for use, really even building it into some of your compliance checks. What I'm really impressed with Olympus Connect, you can actually download for the specific scope that you're looking at and even some different instruments. It is a pre-compiled every step of the process set up as a checklist. And that way, this is something that you can do as you're auditing. You can put this into your digital compliance system so you can check your process. But also just go around and see what brushes do you have, ask what brushes are being used. And then especially when you're seeing things such as sterile pipe cleaner, maybe see if there's a more updated IFU that's out there that has more descriptive directions, especially when you're looking at something that says the appropriate size. This is a slippery slope for many people. When you're talking 1/8 of an inch, that's very small, and these channels are very small. So trying to see that with your naked eye, depending on throughput and how fast things are going through, there just might not be time. So again, this is an opportunity to use a process where you just kind of ask them to tell you their steps and validate it with the IFUs.
Yeah, that's great. As I'm sitting here thinking, I said I had only 2 pet peeves for IFUs, but I've already thought of like 3 or 4 more. But I'm going to mention one more that that really gets to me, and it's when the manufacturers put in one type of brush that you can use on their equipment. And of course, it's their own brand that you have to have. So what do we do when all of the manufacturers say you must use their own? And now you've got all these different, we already have a million brushes that we need. Now we've got these IFUs saying you have to use all these different brands specific to their item. Do we really have to have their brand, or can we use an equivalent? Ron, we'll start with you again.
That's actually addressed in the AAMI standards.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Tell us.
It's like if you have a brush that they tell you that you must use, you have to use one that's at least equivalent to what they suggest. That's easy. That's a no-brainer. I mean, it's like some of these companies that sell sterilizers or washers. You have to use our detergent. That's hogwash. Okay. It's hogwash. So yeah, you just have to use what's equivalent to what they suggest. Period.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the manufacturer wants you to use their item to clean their device. That makes sense. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. And also, I mean, what else are they going to do? Are they going to put a different company's brush in there? I don't think they're going to do that. So if you have a substantially equivalent item that does meet that criteria, then I would say go ahead and use it. However, double check with your legal department or your, the superiors, because maybe a health system out there is like, listen, this Olympus scope, we're going to use this Olympus brush, and we're not going to screw with it. And there might be a reason for that. So I don't want to encourage anyone to go outside the scope of their facility policies and all that. But Nelson, I'm curious, do you have this issue or these types of situations that you encounter in your department?
I think everyone who's been in this industry long enough will encounter this. And unfortunately, it's just a reality of our industry. But yeah, I like to tell people when they come to me with issues with this, like have a multidisciplinary team of people, infection control, talk to finance. I mean, obviously there's different considerations from them, but the end users, the people on the front line. Talk to a group of people about it, get feedback, and see what the policy says, and find something that is comparable to what is called for in the IFU. A lot of times there are restrictions about getting specialty brushes in or specialty detergents or lubricants, but what you can do is find out what the generic specifications are for them, and then after you've met with a multidisciplinary team, then just make sure that your policies and your decisions are recorded, and that you're able to follow that effectively.
Yeah, and you can even have a documented risk assessment with a multidisciplinary team. Those types of things really go a long way. If, say, a surveyor pulls the IFU and says, well, why aren't you using X manufacturer's brush like it says to? You can say, well, this is why we decided to, and this is how we made the decision. It's equivalent. All great things. We're going to start having to wrap up this episode. The time has just flown by, as usual, when you get this many great people in the same virtual room. So we're going to go around the room and ask everyone to give their go and do tips so everybody can start improving their brush compliance as soon as they get off listening to this podcast. So I'm going to start with Ron as usual.
Always start with Cowboy of Clean. Cool.
That's right.
I can dig it.
Yeah.
For me, it's learn what to use, learn what the proper brush is. And if you're going to do it right the first time and do it right every time. That's my motto. I'm going to stick by it. But you don't know unless you try it. So I'm becoming a poet.
Thanks, Ron. Nelson, what you got for everybody?
I'm going to say that if I can leave one thing with you guys, it's just when in doubt, throw it out. If it starts looking weird, get rid of it. And if you are going to watch it, then make sure that you're documenting that process. Documentation goes a long way.
Great. Emily.
I would say, look at where your supplies are stored. Are they stored in splash zones? Are they stored in areas that they could potentially be cross-contaminated? And really ask questions to see how long has a brush been used, or what is your policy to throw it out? And see if the staff can speak to the policies as well as your upper leadership. And that way everyone's on the same page, because we know those surveyors like asking questions. It's definitely ask questions and where your supplies stored.
And just to follow up on that, I have gone after a brush in service. This really can go for any in service, and asked the technicians what they retained from the in service. It was different from what the managers told me was going to be taught in the in service, and was different from what the vendor actually taught in the in service. So it's really good for IPs to attend in services for that very reason, not only so that you can make sure what's being taught is per policy, but so you know what's being taught too, so that when you go round and you're working with the teams, you can make sure that you heard what is supposed to be done. And that way, when you ask the techs, like, what's the policy, or what are you supposed to be doing, what were you taught, you actually heard it too. Because if you would have gone off of what the manager told you, it might have been wrong. In my case, it was wrong, unfortunately. So it's better for you to hear it straight from the actual in-service itself. Okay, Trevor, why don't you finish up for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would recommend everybody go do right now, or as soon as you stop driving or whatever you're doing, I would recommend you go find the Lumens 2.0 study and you read it, and you read the whole thing, and you should email it to your manager, your supervisor, your infection prevention, and create awareness around this, because yes, brushes are very, very important, and we have to clean these lumens. On top of that, there are some items in your department that are disgusting and have been baked and caked, and they're just not getting clean, even when you have the right size brush. So I would say do that. Consider a brush assessment. Use your borescopes. Look into these things, because we all have those high risk items that, are really hard to clean. Yank hours are a great example. How are you supposed to clean it? You can't. It's the way it's designed is not conducive to be able to remove the patient tissue and everything that's getting in there. So I would say start with the research, send it to people, ask them what they think about it, talk about it with your department, bring it up at shift change, and just start to creatively problem solve for whatever it is that you're going through in your department.
Thank you, Trevor. And sorry, guys, I have to admit, I like Trevor's advice the best. But if you haven't read Lumens 2.0 and you want to help to find it, please let me know. It is open access in AGIC. That about does it for us here today. This was awesome advice on brushes. Stay tuned for our next episode, number 11, next time, and we will see you then. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to this exclusive podcast series on pathogens and PPE. For more information and clinical resources to help you fight dirty, make sure to follow us on social media by searching for Beyond Clean and Transmission Control.